All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast, here in the opening tip, talking about a news item that broke a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to let it marinate a little bit. Talking about a little bit of a situation MLB may have with Congress right now. Joining me today, our legal correspondent Phil Fraietta is here. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing good, Mike. How are you?
Doing pretty good here. And I gotta say, when I saw this news item a few weeks ago, like this caught me completely out of left field. And to set the stage for the audience here, there's a bipartisan letter from the Senate Judiciary Committee where targeting MLB's antitrust exemption. So what did you think when you first saw this?
Pretty surprised. Seems to have just totally come out of left field. This letter. Didn't really think there was anything going on that would make you expect that this letter was coming, other than the 100-year anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Federal Baseball Club versus National League, which the senators do reference in the letter. But still surprised that this happened.
Yeah, to be clear, this is a bipartisan effort here. It's the letter signed by the chair, Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, ranking member, Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, all signed by Richard Blumenthal, a Connecticut Democrat, Mike Lee, Republican from Utah here. And I think the fact is that, like, first of all, before we get more into the bipartisanship of it here, can you explain the antitrust exemption and what it means for baseball?
Sure. So antitrust laws are something that the public is generally familiar with. They prevent businesses from collaborating or conspiring against consumers or against labor. In the case of baseball, that obviously is going on because all you have to do is just think about it. You know, the Yankees and the Mets are obviously separate organizations, but they conspire together to participate in the same kind of league, and that league is it imposes a variety of rules. You know, you're not allowed, your stadium has to be this big, you're not allowed to move stadiums without permission, so on and so forth. So there's that aspect of it. Baseball is the only sport that is exempt from antitrust laws in America. And that is because 100 years ago, the Supreme Court decided a case and determined that the antitrust exemption did not reach baseball because baseball, according to the court in that case, was not really a business. It was more of a intrastate event. So a game only took place in New York. It wasn't really a business that implicated multiple states, so therefore Congress couldn't regulate it. That was the rationale for that decision. That has obviously since been altered. We no longer think of commerce in that literal sense. Obviously, a baseball game in New York has goods and services coming in from all different states. So in the 70s, the court revised that part and said that no, that's no longer the rationale, but continued to hold the antitrust exemption, and an opinion that is really hard to square, drafted at that time by Justice Blackmun, that the first, I believe it's 5, I haven't read it in a while, but I think it's 5 or 6 pages, simply lists baseball players and gives a history of the game of baseball and how important baseball is to America. The decision's Flood versus Kuhn. And then ultimately decides that because of the concept of stare decisis, which means upholding prior precedent, Congress can't, or the court can't change its prior precedent, which as anybody who's following the news knows, that's not necessarily true. The court can certainly change their precedent, as they just did with some hot button issues like abortion. So, but nonetheless, that's the decision. That's the law. It's it's a strange opinion when you read it. It really starts out as basically just what's been described as an ode to baseball.
Yeah, it is certainly strange for sure. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last year. Remember when the MLB moved the All-Star game from Atlanta? There was a bunch of Republicans who tried to go after the exemption at that time, sort of a payback move, or that sort of went nowhere here. I do think it's interesting, though, here that we get this whole bipartisan effort, specifically looking at the minor league player aspect. I know minor league rights have been a big deal of late in terms of the league as an issue here, and probably a little bit neglected marketing here, but like, why do you think the Congress is looking specifically at the minor leagues in terms of this exemption?
So probably because it's low hanging fruit. There's a legitimate labor issue in the minor leagues that's been detailed and we've talked about on this podcast. Minor league players are really not paid well, and minor league baseball is hanging on by a thread. They obviously cut a substantial number of teams. They blamed it on the pandemic, but I think you and I both think that it was happening anyway. Pandemic kind of just accelerated it. So that's probably why, just low hanging fruit.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting here. I feel like in terms of the minor league example here, I do feel like that this was something, again, we talked about last year with the Republicans going after this. And I do think in terms of the lockout baseball had, I did notice back, I think in April, right before they settled this, that Dick Durbin wrote a letter basically saying, you know what, why are we having these issues for the customers? It's not fair. Like, maybe the Antitrust Exemption should be challenged. And a few weeks later, we get this letter. So I wonder if it's something that's been germinating in their minds over the course of this winter.
I'd imagine that it's been germinating in their minds because the antitrust exemption is it's just really impossible to justify. It's obviously something that the rationale for the decision, that first, that baseball is only played in one state, obviously not true, and second, that we can't overturn our prior precedents, obviously not true, is just a little, it's hard to wrap your head around and look at in a non-cynical fashion. 50 years ago in the Flood versus Kuhn case, there were dissenting justices, and they pointed out that at that time, so we're talking about the early 70s, that to consider baseball anything but a business at that point was crazy. And now it's certainly just lunacy. How could you call baseball anything than a big business? That's what it is. Major League Baseball is big business in this country.
Yeah, big business basically being granted the authority through this exemption to actually operate a legal monopoly here, whereas we've seen the NFL does have competitors. I mean, we've seen the XFL rebooted coming. We got a USFL season. The NBA had the ABA, and obviously, hockey, I'm sure they've had some competitors. Baseball, like, you're not allowed to legally make a league to compete as professional baseball.
Yeah, well, baseball has the ability to just basically suffocate you so you can't compete.
Yeah.
Whether that's restricting where teams are allowed to play, TV blackouts, things of that sort. But it probably doesn't really matter in those contexts. It's not the fear that somebody's going to come in and start a league to take away from baseball. It's more the fear of the minor league system. The entire minor league system relies on baseball, Major League Baseball, being exempt from antitrust. That's how they're able to control minor league baseball. It's how they're able to set salaries, make rules, designate which minor league organizations belong to which major league affiliates, and prevent one team from, just signing a guy who is in the organization of another, which otherwise would happen, right? If there's a prospect in, say the Pirates organization, O'Neill Cruz, a lot of people thought he was ready to come up months ago. Without the antitrust exemption, there would have been nothing stopping the Yankees from saying, you want to play, we need a shortstop, congratulations, you have a job.
Yeah, it's a good point here. I do think it's interesting here, whereas like several times before that the Senate has tried to come for the entire exemption, they have not come close to that. It feels like here, this bipartisan effort seems to be looking at carving out the minor leaguers from the antitrust exemption, which is something that happened to the major league players in '98 with the Curt Flood Act. And basically, according to an article from Evan Drellick in The Athletic I was looking at earlier, basically said that if like it gives them the option to basically have MLB maintain the antitrust exemption for business purposes, but the players can sue for antitrust grounds by disbanding their union, which has not been attempted yet. If the minor leaguers, I think, get pulled out of this and basically say, okay, you're exempt too from the antitrust thing, I think this could create a lot of problems with baseball.
It would be a disaster for baseball. So baseball right now is able to run this minor league system. Baseball is the reason why the antitrust exemption is why you have this minor league system in baseball that you don't see elsewhere. So the answer that the NBA and the NFL came up with is to essentially use colleges. They are able to use college basketball and college football as their breeding ground for young players who are not quite ready for the pros, and they can scout them that way. But because they wouldn't be able to assemble any sort of a minor league affiliate and restrict where players can go. If they opt out of baseball, you got a big problem. Because here's what ultimately likely happens is minor league baseball players unionize. And if they unionize, you're going to have a labor dispute. And if you end up with some sort of a strike in minor league baseball, that would be a disaster for Major League Baseball. What happens when a team has injuries? Where do they go to call up some, we need a left fielder? Well, where are you going to get that left fielder? You can't call them up, they're on strike. So you're going down to the college ball, try and pluck a left fielder out of college. It becomes a big problem.
Yeah, in terms of that specifically, I think that refers basically to any of the minor leaguers. There's like about 1,200 of them who are not on 40-man rosters. So like basically like if the Mets wanted to call up Mark Vientos, they can because he's on their 40-man roster. But they wanted to add, say, like Brett Batty, their other top prospect, they cannot because he would be on the strike and not the 40-man roster.
Right. The guys in the 40-man do get protection from the Major League Baseball Players Union. But guys who are not on the 40-man get nothing.
Yeah, also I think it's interesting here because I think this issue also arose because of the recent contraction of the minor leagues. So we had 160 affiliates to 120, and it's something that the Congress has taken issue with in the past few years here. Like how do you think like this would be impacted here if they said, okay, we're gonna carve out the minor leaguers here, and basically you can't dictate where these teams can go and like who can connect with who? Like I feel like this would all Pandora's box the way the league would not want.
It would be a disaster, just a complete disaster. Now, I don't think that Congress wants to do that, but I do think that Congress wants to create some sort of a system or pressure baseball into it where minor league baseball players can get a little more labor freedom, similar to what major leaguers have. A union, the ability to negotiate pay, things of that sort.
Yeah, maybe like an ability to like sort of get into like a free agency situation earlier where like maybe they're stuck in an organization that's not really advancing, then they can go to another team and give themselves a chance to like advance their careers a little bit.
Yeah, now, one thing to note though, that with minor league baseball, that makes this a little tricky, and there's no other job really in the world that I can think of like this. Most jobs that are unionized, whether it be professional sports or otherwise, you want to work in that field. That's why you're in the job, and you want to keep your job. Minor league baseball players, by definition, do not want to keep their jobs. They want to make the major leagues. So there is far less sense of unity amongst labor when it comes to minor league baseball. You're teammates, but let's face it, you want your teammate to not do well, and you want to do well so that you make the major leagues, and he doesn't. If the team needs one bat, well, you want to be that bat. So from that standpoint, it does add a wrinkle. And so it's an odd circumstance. It's the only job I can think of where you don't want to actually be there long term.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point here. I think also let's go down the hypothetical road here. Let's say for some reason that like they try and get the baseball cooperate, baseball doesn't, and they say, we're going to get enough support here. We're going to blow up the exemption entirely. What would happen to baseball if that happened?
Disaster. They'd end up in a situation where they'd have to be trying to reorganize the minor league. Minor league players would probably jump all over the place. you'd have a situation not too different than you're seeing with the golf right now and the live golf. That's different in that I don't think superstar players wouldn't be leaving, but top prospects who are not on 40-man rosters would. They'd be jumping all over the place for whoever's willing to pay them the most money. And it would be a total disaster. And I do think that the Supreme Court has shown a little bit of a willingness to revisit this. Justice Gorsuch in particular has been writing about this for years, even when he was an appellate court judge. And now in the NCAA case that we talked about, there was a reference to federal baseball, which we discussed earlier, by Justice Gorsuch again. This is something that he has indicated or made clear that he is very, very willing to revisit.
Yeah, I also want to ask a second about, like, I know that one of the things that they have advantage of with the antitrust exemption is that they can control where they do their business. For example, like we have a team like Tampa, which has been trying to enact their split stadium plan with Montreal and Tampa, and like they would need league approval to move. Whereas if there was no antitrust exemption, they could say, "Fine, we're going to move wherever the hell we want."
Yep, absolutely. The Tampa Bay Rays could say, "You know what? We think New York can sustain a third team. We're going to New York."
Yeah.
And nobody could stop them.
Yeah, same thing with the A's. The A's could go to Vegas, so that like without any hesitation from the league.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that just goes a lot into like I know like Senator Grassley's also been big on the blackouts in baseball make no sense. Like why are we having 7 different teams getting blacked out in Iowa? Like the territorial rights thing that is sort of then define the broadcast thing would also be like ripped to shreds if the antitrust goes away.
Yep, kills regional sports networks, kills them.
Yeah. Because then everybody could offer every team, every market.
Yeah. And let's face it, I know right now you can get that if you're a baseball fan, you can buy MLB.TV, but there are some players who play for other teams who you would probably be able to broadcast every night.
Shohei Ohtani,
yeah. The Yankees have nationwide appeal. The Mets have nationwide appeal. The Red Sox have nationwide appeal. You can probably broadcast those teams every night, and they'd beat the draws of local teams in places like Kansas City.
Yeah,
sure,
absolutely. So, based on what you read here so far, based on the letter that they sent out, and some of the, I know this Congress ability to do a lot of things. Obviously, seeing that they have regulating guns of bills, they have January 6th hearings, all that. This is a separate Senate issue here. Like, what are the odds you think that this exemption gets altered in some way? You think this is just like them blowing smoke, trying to grandstand? You think something actually happens?
I think it's low. This is still politics. These are politicians. There are political implications in play. I'm not sure what the likelihood of anything coming of this is. I think it's worth monitoring, but I don't think anything's imminent.
All right. One of the things I think is worth monitoring here, we sort of mentioned this story off the air. I want to bring it on the air here, is that the NFL's the congressional investigation to the Washington Commanders organization, what's going on with Dan Snyder. I mean, Roger Goodell testified in front of Congress, I think a week or two ago. He was basically grilled about like why Snyder is still the owner in Washington, and he said, "Hey, like I can't remove him. It's like this whole process for this." The committee is also subpoenaed Dan Snyder. He's been trying to avoid the subpoena here. So, what do you think is going on here with this, the Daniel Snyder situation with Washington?
I think Dan Snyder's in trouble. Dan Snyder does not have many friends outside of NFL ownership circles, and I think that Congress is going to really try and get this guy, get him to testify, and force him out. Snyder, he just doesn't have any friends.
Yeah, I feel like the end goal here, I feel like they're going to keep like pushing the lawyers to get him out to testify. I think this is going to, I think my prediction here is that this is going to force, there's going to be some back channel deal here between Goodell and some of the other influential owners to basically vote him out and put that team up for sale. So they don't have to have him airing dirty laundry in front of Congress.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that the owners, they probably don't really care about Snyder. They're probably ready to let the guy go.
Yeah, I think they're more concerned is that like I think they're trying to weigh right now. My personal guess is like if we cut bait at him, does he just go do an interview somewhere and air all our secrets. I think that's their big concern.
Probably.
Yeah.
But Snyder's, I think it's probably time for him to go. You know, the allegations about what happened in Washington are bad enough, but Snyder's he's just been a bad owner. I don't think anybody could argue otherwise.
Yeah, both on the field and off the field.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Phil. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, but definitely we'll monitor the antitrust situation. And before we go, one thing that I didn't mention too, the other thing that they noted, the senators, is what's going on in the Dominican Republic, and that's something that's interesting to look at too. There's a great athletic piece about this, about the just absolute corruption, Ken Rosenthal and Maria Torres, of what goes on in Dominican baseball, and just exploiting poor teenagers from a young age, whether it's performance enhancing drugs or putting them into training facilities at a young age with the promise of money. That's a problem. That's something that Congress is going to look at too.